Good evening again. We have come to the time now of our latter presentation, but we're going to do that by standing and doing our national anthem. Let's stand, please. Invite Mrs. Lisa Harrison, chairman of the Norman Washington Manley Foundation, to come and do the official welcome.
Thank you. On behalf of the Norman Washington Manley Foundation, I welcome you to Regardless. This toehold that Edna and Norman built is a small home that they created after the family had to sell the rest of their estate to settle debts. They called the house Regardless. Regardless of the loss, regardless of the reduced circumstances, regardless of how much had to be given up, the work continued here. It is in that vein that we welcome the conversations here this evening. This space that housed the continuation of Norman Manley's work, even after the loss of the referendum, must continue to host conversations like these. That is why the property is a National Heritage Site. That is why the Norman Manley Foundation, the Edna Manley Foundation, the Michael Manley Foundation are all committed to the preservation and development of this site. We welcome you here this evening, and we look forward to even more conversations like this. This is part of our vision for this space, and we are really excited for this to be one of the first such conversations. Thanks and welcome.
Thank you very much. Now we want to move our program into a time of greetings, and we'll be having greetings from some past Prime Ministers of Jamaica, starting with Mr. Patterson.
Today, the 4th of July, marks the 133rd anniversary of the birth of Norman Washington Manley, universally acknowledged as the architect of modern Jamaica and a pioneer of the movement for Caribbean integration. It is also the 250th anniversary of independence for a country whose capital is Washington, the identical middle name with our late great national hero. Few seem to remember that CARICOM Day is also the 4th of July. It was so designated by our founding fathers in Chagaramas in 1973 to salute the memory and perpetuate the legacy of one who is a proud forefather of Caribbean regionalism. Let me applaud this bold initiative of the Foundation to celebrate his birthday with a focused discourse on the eve of the 51st meeting of CARICOM heads to begin in Castries, St. Lucia. It was in 1947 at Montego Bay that Norman Manley espoused the vision of our wielding the power of diversity into a formidable force that could stand shoulder to shoulder with all other nations in the world. He believed that from the diversity of Africa, India, China, and Europe, we could weld the many strands of the world to combine in forging our own unique Caribbean civilization. At heart and by conviction as an eminent jurist, Norman Manley was first and foremost a true Democrat who believed in the inherent right of the people to choose. And so, when the referendum, which he ordered, took place, he accepted the verdict of the people with a grace that set the gold standard of conduct, a practice and a template which I hope current leaders will seek to emulate. He steadfastly proceeded thereafter to secure Jamaica's independence with the same meticulous care that he brought to every legal brief. For reasons best known to them, our leaders chose to depart from custom and not include the 4th in their meeting, but to do so beginning on the 5th instead. I hope they will use and benefit from the extra day to prepare for the arduous challenges which confront them. The chairman has already indicated the topics that will be on the agenda. How to ensure the meaning exercise of our sovereignty. How we in the Caribbean maintain it as a zone of peace. How we face the perils of global warming and the savagery of climate change. And also, in light of the recent decision of the United Nations and the conference in Ghana, we have to pursue the battle to win reparative justice for the greatest crime against humanity. It was my privilege to have seen the action being taken to forge regional solidarity and to create new regional structures to exercise our collective sovereignty. This is a time when we must steadfastly pursue that course. Norman Manley envisages the Caribbean as a wider field for individual ambition. This is neither a matter for nostalgia nor a pipe dream. It demands visionary leadership, the exercise of our finest intellectual minds, and the tremendous creative energy of all our people. We have a duty and an obligation on this solemn day to commit ourselves to fulfilling the legacy of Norman Washington Manley by building a sound edifice for generations to come.
Prime Minister P.J. Patterson. And now we have some brief words from former Prime Minister Bruce Golding, which I'll read. Reflection on the federal experiment. Norman Manley believed passionately that Jamaica's hopes and aspirations could more successfully be pursued in union with the other English-speaking Caribbean countries rather than going it alone. It was primarily his inspiration that led to the initiation of the West Indies Federation at the Montego Bay Conference of 1947. It was formalized in 1958. What emerged was more of a confederation than a federation, in that it did not provide for an effective executive authority. It lacked a viable central government and allowed for individual countries to secede, as Jamaica subsequently did. It may not have been what Manley wanted, but it was the best that could be agreed on at the time. Federation is a daunting undertaking, requiring each country to surrender much of its autonomy to a supranational authority. How much of that autonomy is left with individual countries is a vexed and complex issue not easily resolved. How that central authority is held accountable to the people in the respective countries poses another conundrum. A federation rests on a shaky footing unless those issues are reconciled, as was shown with the separation of Bangladesh from Pakistan and Singapore from Malaysia, in the former case after bitter armed conflict. The West Indies Federation faced other difficulties. While we had a shared history of slavery and colonialism, geography was not kind to us. The distance between Jamaica and Trinidad is more than 1,000 miles, twice the distance between Jamaica and the United States. Because of this, we hardly knew each other. In 1958, and maybe even now, the vast majority of Jamaicans had never met anyone from the Eastern Caribbean, and the only things that connected us apart from our history were the UWI and the West Indies cricket team. That kind of strangerhood breeds insularity. The collapse of the West Indies Federation did not blur the recognition that as a small, underdeveloped country, notwithstanding being a sovereign state, it would be a hard slog for us to make it entirely on our own. Enter Carifta and then CARICOM. Through the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, specific areas of cooperation were identified and the relevant operating procedures defined. Those efforts have not been without some successes, but they have fallen far short of what had been promised. They too have been bedeviled by some of the same issues that caused the Federation to fail. Conflicts over sovereignty and autonomy, the lack of executing authority, the requirement that decisions must enjoy unanimous support, and the fact that the pace of advancement is defined by that of the tardiest member country. What is most lacking is a refreshed vision of what our collective efforts are capable of achieving for all of us, and the political will to infuse that vision into our policies, decisions, and actions. Sadly, the weaknesses in the CARICOM construct are being laid bare. The community is badly fragmented, and we are allowing ourselves to be played against each other by powerful external forces. That may well be what Norman Manley wanted to guard against. Those were comments from former Prime Minister Bruce Golding. At this time, we're going to see a clip from Rachel Manley.
He took a risk with the Federation and it did not pay off. But my grandmother's irritation was that she had told him not to. It was really heartbreaking. And then I don't think it helped when his great friend Eric made a comment, 1 from 10 leaves nothing. That hurt him profoundly. Not hurt him, offended him. The truth of it weighed on him, knowing that they couldn't do it without Jamaica. They just couldn't. And then you look at the little Eastern Caribbean doing so well with their arrangement. Of course we could have had federation. Of course we could have. We'd have been so powerful in the world. I remember I was talking to a Jamaican PNP politician, somebody that I have a great affection and admiration for. And he was almost appalled that I still spoke of federation. He said, "You must be crazy, but you're an intelligent person. That can never happen." And I suddenly realized people really don't feel, intelligent, sensitive people really don't feel it could happen. I think it could.
Okay, friends, we have come to the time in our program where we want to move to our panel discussion. And it is my task now to introduce to you our panelists. Trevor Munroe, one of Caribbean's leading public scholars, has had a distinguished record as an academic in civil society, advocacy, and in public service. Currently, the Principal Director of National Integrity Action and a member of the International Council of Transparency International, he has authored several books in the Caribbean, democratic governance, and founded the UWI Center for Leadership and Governance. As a civil society advocate, Professor Munroe was instrumental as founder or co-founder of the Citizens Action for Free and Fair Elections, CAFE, Jamaica's Election Observer Group, and the University and Allied Workers Union, UAW. Professor Munroe served in Jamaica's Senate for 10 years, championing legislation for greater transparency, accountability, and good governance. In Jamaica's 2015 National Honors, Professor Munroe was awarded the Order of Distinction Commander Class. Welcome, Professor Munroe. We also have on the panel Sunity Maharaj, who is a director of the Lloyd Best Institute of the Caribbean, a non-profit organization founded by her late husband, Lloyd Best, as an independent agency for research and public policy. Under her stewardship, the institution has networked communities of indigenous knowledge and activity, and from this has come the Caribbean Yard Campus, an initiative designed to bridge the informal and formal knowledge systems of the Caribbean. Former independent senator of Trinidad and Tobago, she has served in several capacities, including as a media consultant, a lecturer in journalism, editor of the Trinidad and Tobago Review, and group executive for editorial and content development at One Caribbean Media, editor-in-chief of the Trinidad Express, and news director of TV6 in Trinidad. Okay. Then the third panelist is Dr. Peter Morgan. Bishop Dr. Peter Morgan is a graduate of University of the West Indies and a former senior education officer in the Ministry of Education in Jamaica. He was responsible for implementing the Guidance Counseling Program in all secondary schools in Jamaica in the 1970s and for developing ongoing training modules for counselors. He has pursued postgraduate studies in USA with practical research in pastoral psychology and field experience in psychiatry and juvenile delinquency. Dr. Morgan is the chairman of the International Association of Kingdom Churches and Ministries. He is also a founding director of the Caribbean Israel Leadership Coalition. He's currently the co-chairman of WOLMI ICC, that's WOLMI-ICC, a United Nations accredited organization committed to the transformation of nations across the globe. He's currently Dean of Postgraduate Studies at the Caribbean Nazarene College in Trinidad and Tobago. And to lead this discussion, we have Ambassador Byron Blake, who will be coming to you shortly. He's the chairman of the board and co-founder of Vihara Foundation. Is that how it's pronounced, sir? All right. Having served as a Jamaica ambassador to the United Nations and as a former senior advisor to the President of the General Assembly of the United Nations, Byron Blake is an economist with over 45 years' experience working at different levels in institution building, policy development and promotion, planning, program and project development and promotion in the Caribbean community, CARICOM, from 1970 to 2004. Currently, he serves as the CARICOM chair for the redevelopment of Haiti. I'm going to invite Ambassador Blake to come now and to lead us in this part of the discussions.
Thank you very much for the introduction and for setting up the meeting. I was advised by visionary and leader that my role is to just guide. But those who know me will know that that is a difficult thing for Blake to do, especially when we're talking about Caribbean integration. So, and also when we are talking about the situation and legacy of Norman Washington Manley, who I happen to have had the privilege of chairing a meeting that we had him as student to address at the Micro Teachers College, so that, you know, I have to do a little bit more than just guiding. When I was on my way here, I heard a professor, and he was speaking to the issue, especially of Norman Manley as the Federalist, but he also mentioned the Nationalist. I want to say here's a man who was, I say, a nationalist, which means Jamaica to be freed from the empire. Man who was a federalist, which says really in the 1950s and into 60s, if you really wanted a small state to be not only just called sovereign, but to be a sovereign which could exercise something, then you had to have a little bit more than 1 million or so person at the time, and a little bit more land space than 144 square meters. right? He was a Democrat. I suspect that to the very bone, as a result of which, he believed in the will of the people. So, called the referendum, didn't have to call. And when that happened, he said, well, national independence, and he called the elections. No, he knew, must have known that the probability of losing that election was extremely high. But he wanted the guidance of the people. So, as PJ, I think, mentioned, was how many of our current leaders have not just the desire for power, but the fact that you must be legitimized. You must be legitimized by the people in whatever you're doing. It's a risk, and he paid the price. But it's clearly one that he was willing to take. But our question for this session is that vision, the vision of the Caribbean as a unity, a lost vision, so to speak? And is there a way to reformulate that vision? Someone, it was Rachel made the point that a lot of people say you cannot do it by going as a federation because too many people think that it can't work. So, but you can't have any substance just at being like a national. Hence, starting with Carifta, someone mentioned, there was a movement, and people have defined it. And Professor Kenneth Hall, former Lord, has said, and he has written, that one William Dimas, and I don't know who I got linked to it, one Byron Blake, were trying to introduce federation by stealth. I.e., was there a way to have these countries combine their attributes and move such that they could not only have a level of political autonomy, but also economic and social? When we ask the question, can it move forward? The Caribbean, and this is the conundrum that we're up against now. We are respected internationally because we have 15 votes, right? But we are respected internationally if we use those 15 votes as a collective. If you use them 1-1-1-1, then you have lost the respect. So the trick is, how can you use those 15 votes, which is why people come to meetings of the CARICOM heads? I guarantee you that there are some leaders from outside the region and international institution who will turn up in St. Lucia tomorrow. Incidentally, PJ mentioned the fact that we're having the meeting starting a day after it's supposed to be. And last year it started a day after it was supposed to be as well. Before that, it only happened twice, and those times were explained by real circumstances. I am hoping that we are not drifting mentally from the fact that there's something that we need to rally around. So posts that we need to have as benchmark posts. But saying that as it may, if we can recognize that we bring our attributes together, including the 15 votes, you utilize them as the 15 votes. You utilize your attributes for the production and trade, not only goods but services, and therefore you have a negotiating position in markets. That is where you stand best. But to do that, countries have to be prepared to subjugate the national instinct and the instinct to, when it gets to a hard decision, say, well, I'm still going to stay with it. Everybody can stay with the easy decisions. But when you get to the hard decision, which really could impact your, what you might call your national sovereignty on this particular issue, to see above the fact that this particular issue is national, but to see long term and even know that you are better off subjecting and losing out, so to speak, on this one and carrying it. So that is the trick, and therefore, one question is, do we have the kind of political leadership that can blend the people and say, well, look, we know that on this particular score, we have to, we might not, say Jamaica, we might not be the greatest beneficiary, but overall, taking a long view, collaboration is best thing. When I left CARICOM in 2004, end of 2004, I was certain that we had created the framework for a single market and economy supported by the things on the education side, the things on the health side, the things on the disaster preparedness and so forth, that we had the frame. Little by little, people did not carry through on the decision, which was made, and every difficulty was ironed out and identified. But people are allowed to not follow through, and gradually, I don't even think now, even though that we are back where we were. So I say all of that to say, Manley would perhaps say that by vision in 47, it's even more relevant now, because you're at a point now in history where you have a hemispheric big or not, the United States of America, which happens to be a federation of 50 states, but those states are large. The global behemoth, China, an amalgam of some 31 also administrative regions. Those administrative regions are large. If we exclude Hong Kong and Macau, the smallest has a population of 7.2 million. That is half of the population of CARICOM. We include Haiti, we'll take the 15. So the smallest of those things. So we have to understand that we cannot operate really in that framework without coming together. So how do you come together and use it as those states come together and use their thing and their collectivity, and therefore able to secure their ends, sometimes very illegally. The United States secured a lot of its ends, and I have happened to sit at the opposite end of the table to them in negotiations, and you see the illegality, you see it, but they're big. So you have to. So I'm saying, how do we and can we get our leadership around this? I think this is where, at this point in CARICOM, we have to say it straight to leaders. You're going down a path which is dangerous, and not only dangerous for the Caribbean as a region, the Caribbean as a zone of peace, the Caribbean as an area where we could protect the integrity of the environment, but for you as individual countries, because once you have slipped and become somebody's, the next time around, you are weak. Nobody is going to pay you any attention, really. So, as our leaders assemble, and as we think about it, and we think of the vision of a true Democrat, someone who was willing to sacrifice his personal ambitions to try to really create a region. He thought the federal route was the route. We might question that, but the route of joining our sovereignty and maximizing the value of our sovereignty is what he really had in mind. And we have to get that across. Byron Blake, you're supposed to be just a guide. So, who do I call on first? Is it the Right Reverend Doctor? But before I call him, let me just say the Caribbean Council of Churches, and especially through CADEC, was in the vanguard of the regional integration process. They were the ones who, for example, had a conference, economic conference, early days of Carifta, start pushing. They were a significant part of the group that established the Caribbean, what is the Caribbean Tourism Organization. About three reverends, Reverend Hatch, Robert Hatch, forget two of the others, but they were at the vanguard of creating that. The tourism thing, in fact, went beyond the CARICOM countries. So the church has always had a very important role, and I hope that they are re-stimulating that role. So, Reverend Doctor, over to you, sir.
Yes, well, I really appreciate what has been shared so far, and I appreciate your introductory statements as well. I must say that I am personally appreciative of what was shared by Professor Trevor Munroe, and also of Professor Rupert. I think that my link with Cuba makes me very much interested in what is happening, because people don't know, but I have Cuban heritage. My mother was Cuban, and I've always had a heart for Cuba and what is happening in Cuba. And then, of course, in what was shared about Haiti is very significant. My daughter is married to a Haitian, and so I've had a lot very closely related to Haiti and what's happening there. So I really appreciate all that has been shared. What the key thing that I just like to mention three very significant things, which, I'll mention them, and then of course we can expand on them as we discuss. But one of the things is that I recognize I'm a historian, and I have a good background knowledge of what has happened to us as a Caribbean people over the years. And I can just summarize and say that we are a freedom going people. We are confident as a people, and we have led the way, whether academically, in the riots during the slave riots, in the establishment, of labor unions with Affolink-Garveyism, the movement towards self-government, and all of these kinds of things. And of course, in the rest of the Caribbean, we remember the Black Jacobins in Haiti that created the first Black republic in the Western Hemisphere, in fact. And who can forget, more recently, the Cuban Revolution that was designed to shake off the austere imperialistic hold of the wealthy political nations, and to establish us in the Caribbean as an strong economic base. Cuba did that as an example for us. And then, of course, here we are sitting with Trevor Munroe and others like him. The short-lived socialistic idealism of people like Rodney of Guyana, Maurice Bishop from Grenada, Trevor himself from Jamaica, and so on. And I think that perhaps they didn't achieve all they wanted to achieve. In the end, they may seem to have been defeated, but a lot was accomplished through them, and we continue to remember them. And it's in the same way that I think of Norman Manley. I was deeply affected. I was a youngster, just like Trevor was, when the Federation didn't work. And it affected me deeply. But I do not ignore the burden and the vision for the region, which was birthed, and it was strongly birthed in me. And so I think there's a heritage that we should not ignore, and I give God thanks for that. But there are two missing things that I think that I would like to present here. One is the role of the church. And one of the things that we tend to ignore, at least we don't talk about it, and we don't with it in mind, and that is that the church is undoubtedly, to my mind, the most powerful and the most resourceful organization in Jamaica and across the Caribbean. We have the practical skills, we have the moral integrity, and we have the population of spiritual people who can provide the kind of communities that will transform townships and possess cities and govern nations. In our churches, amongst the members, there are accomplished politicians, there are judges, jurists, sociologists, educators, economists, lawyers, engineers, architects, everybody, psychologists, educators, then the artists and the media experts. They're all there in the church. One of the things that we have to challenge the church about, and that's part of my job, is for them not to think that they exist for themselves, but rather that they exist in order to determine the quality of life that we live, and they must have an influence in the political sphere, in the leadership, in the professional fields, in the service industries, and they must play a role. That is the mandate that was left for the church to disciple nations and to become the presence of the power of spiritual authority that Christ represented in what I regard as his role in his time, and certainly in the first century, where we saw a quiet revolution that took place. And that has happened in history. We can trace that from time to time. So my role is to challenge the church to produce men and women who can be, as we are told to be, the salt in the earth, to be the light to the world, and to be the yeast in the dough, and to plant the kind of seeds, to invest, to create the kind of harvest that we want. And I think that is a challenge that the church really has to pick up and to carry out. Now, it's been happening. And I think that we are in a season today when, although the church has tended to become religious, withdrawn, escapist in their thinking, separated from the state, yet now I think that there is a whole movement, and I'm part of that movement. I think that what we're doing here is part of that movement as well. I have been involved in the International Third World Leaders Association. I've been involved in movements in Guyana, in Trinidad, in Barbados, in which the church has exercised some responsibility in seeking to influence their governments. But the third thing I just want to mention is that we don't really have a choice in the Caribbean about coming together. CARICOM is a good example, then they're trying, but I think that, we need to go far beyond what CARICOM is attempting and what they are doing. My view that the West, the Western Hemisphere, which is claimed, they protect it, they act as if the West belongs to them, and we understand why they would think that way. But I think today it is necessary, if we are going to restore the concept and the necessity for regional integration, we don't have a choice, because we have to. Do you realize that the Caribbean region is not just made up of CARICOM states, 15 nations, islands? No, the Caribbean region is a broad region that touches the South America. We are talking about, Venezuela. We're talking about Colombia. We're talking about the territories in Central America that are Caribbean, have Caribbean links. We're talking about the ocean economy. We're talking about, what we can do and become as a people together. If we don't do that, then America will continue to treat us like sycophants and to treat us in an imperialistic way and so on. We can become as powerful as the North American continent, as powerful as the South American continent, if you ever stop and consider the wealth, resources, the geosphere, the population of the whole Caribbean, which includes the Cuba and Haiti and Dominican Republic and the Virgin Islands and of course Central American countries, and so on. That's how we can restore Caribbean unity and become as powerful a body, security-wise, economically wise, intellectually wise, politically wise, and so on. I think there's a lot that we can do, and I would love to see us take some initiative in this way. I am part of movements that are pulling together professionals, diplomats, and so on, leaders in the Caribbean region who must establish the entire Caribbean as a protector and a keeper of the West. And then we can talk with the United States, support them in what they're doing in that regard, and not become an imperialist dog, so to speak, or an underdog. We can be as powerful economically, socially, educationally, academically as the United States. So I just wanted to say those things. We can discuss around that, and perhaps Trevor and others can can put their piece in there as well.
Demonstration, one of the best demonstration of the capacity of the churches came out after the 2010 earthquake in Haiti, where in no time churches, not now I'm using churches mobilized and had all kinds of programs. But I use churches because they were doing it individually. I remember Paul Miller of United Church. He had started a process to try and pull it together and say, no, let us not go one by one, let us go as a group. And then, of course, Paul died, and that was the end of the effort. So, Bishop, you have one further challenge, which is to get the church to work in these vineyards as church and not as churches. So that is a challenge which I'm throwing out to you. But I say that as a way of directing to my other panelists. I have two panelists to come. But if you know me, my vote has to go in favor of the lady first. Sorry, Trevor. My vote has to go in favor of the lady first. So, look, I did a lot of work with your late husband from CARICOM on Caribbean economics, Caribbean integration, and so forth. So I now want to pull you in for your comments, and then I'll come back at home to Trevor.
Well, I'd like to start off by thanking you for inviting me to join this panel. Everything I've heard from the previous speakers really are consistent with people with a deep passion and commitment and to this project of the Caribbean. There's great value in having this event streamed from regardless, because this is a time when our ethos really has to be one of regardless. We are under pressure regardless. The climate, the Mother Nature is acting up regardless. We do not have the leaders to meet this moment regardless. And this is where the people of the Caribbean have to stand in the breach, carry the purpose and carry the project, and raise their voices. I have no doubt that there are many more people that support this project of a united and integrated Caribbean, a Caribbean that realizes its power and potential, its capacity to teach the world something about the creation of a world of many, of diversity, of historic knowledge, of ancient knowledges, current, modern, of something special and unique, something with a capacity, imaginative capacity to create new economies, a new way of relating between labor and capital. All of these things are what reside here. And this is a moment, I think Professor Munroe or someone, I don't know if it was Rupert, talked about in the past 40 years. 40 years is no time in the life of a civilization. It is stressful for those of us who have to live in that particular period. But regardless, we are here. And regardless as a location, and Manley was so smart to use that term, that word, because it means you carry on regardless. And it's a place where a dream is regardless, but it is not the only place in the Caribbean. You traverse the Caribbean and you meet so many people who are, laboring in the vineyards. They are working hard. They are looking after those who are not looked after. They're building dreams. And no investment is coming into it, but they are building nonetheless. And there's a whole Caribbean out there. I think the point was raised. I think going back to Norman Manley, that video that was played is an interview that I did last year, and I used excerpts on it in launching my online podcast on exactly July 4th, because it was his birthday, because it is CARICOM Day, and because anyone I asked, tell me what happened on July 4th. They say, oh, American independence. So the day when our children can say to us, July 4th, when they can answer that question with, today is CARICOM Day, today is the birthday of Norman Washington Manley, I think we would have opened that door into the future that we dream of. Unfortunately, there was no Caribbean entity, and I'm not talking about business, I'm talking about institutional CARICOM interests that were even interested. And today we see where the day is completely overlooked. It could have been a day scheduled as a start. Why is it? Because it's Saturday. What's the problem with Saturday or Sunday? So the value that we put into the symbols that have mystical power, that should have mystical power for us, are not recognized. But regardless, we carry on. And so this is a time of always a time of opportunity. This is a moment it is common knowledge that the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago is at odds with her colleagues on several critical issues. And these are issues of sovereignty, very deep issues of sovereignty. But I have a very clear sense of a majority of Trinidadians and Tobagoans being clear that they are not about to leave CARICOM, that they support CARICOM. They may not be vociferous because they may not think it serious. They may not think her word serious enough to merit, because it just sounds like so much of what we in Trinidad call gambage, we'll talk. And we do not see, and I'm not talking about the business class that has investments in other islands and those. They do not see a Caribbean in which they are apart from, but a part of. And so we sometimes live in a world where we are so cloistered in our little silos and we think that's the world. But we need to step out. I want to go back to, I want to draw a line from the question, the point that was raised by Professor Munroe about the need for political engagement, to have one's mandate as a politician and as a government that comes from the people, because that is at the heart of all the failures, where the implementation deficit that we often talk about with CARICOM is precisely because of that lack of engagement and the lack of a mandate from the people by our leaders when they go to CARICOM. They do not engage the issues. And so it's quite easy to go to CARICOM and agree to all kinds of things, but many things have to go before your parliament. And so they don't dare come back and say, I have agreed to so and so. And why don't they dare? Because there's not enough of a conversation to get buy-in, to have the time to explain for not just governments, but for the other interests, for people to become more engaged in taking responsibility for their countries and their future. And that is why it was so easy to derail the Federation in the first place. It is not often noticed that Eric Williams had squeaked through in 1956 in becoming Premier of Trinidad and Tobago. There was 24 seats and he won, and he got 13 in the election, but not enough to govern in a 31-member unicameral assembly. He needed 15 or 16. And so it's 15, I think. And he had to go and get the British over the head of the governor to agree that 2 of the governor's picks, the government should be allowed to pick them so that when he has a vote in the assembly, he can. If you've got an election in 56 on those terms, it's very hard for you to decide, well, I think I will go and run in the federal parliament, or I'll take the prime ministership for that. Because what happened to Grantley Adams when he accepted that leadership position, He lost the party at home because federal versus the national, the dynamics were not sufficiently developed to not create that problem of national versus federal. And why? It was because the rush job. We were quickly getting the decolonization process was moving apace. There was, a great momentum, do this thing quickly, not just on our side, on the side of England, which had its own economic problems at the time. And so the challenge of carrying people with you into power and having your mandate consistent is a political challenge that continues not to be met to this day. And so when you don't have people power, that not just riling up people that the populists are doing, which is to a great extent the exploitation of ignorance, right? When you don't have that, when you cannot achieve what Norman Manley thought he could, which is a rational conversation in which we all understand our interests and we negotiate our interests to a compromise, and we know what is there for us if we commit to something that will cost us today but bring rewards in the medium to long term, when we could put off that reward and understand that it is there. If we do not develop a political culture, if we do not develop societies, if we can't do that, and if we're constantly taking shortcuts, then we will always be where we are. The problem is that the system rewards those shortcuts because the decolonization process has not pierced the political system. The same colonial system, when you get in there, our best leaders get in there, and then they find you can't carry forward the things you promised with the ethos that you promised, because the government is a going concern, and you just have to constrict and try to work this thing and hope to win the next election, and you can't. And change, transformation is a harder process, and you have to buy people. And I say win people for that. And until we do that, and until people can find the reasons, because they feel valued, because they know what they say counts, that they're not going to be deemed the enemy because they disagree, that they're not going to be marginalized because they winner take all. So the political system remains untransformed. The economic system, we're still running the same economy, exploitation of what we have, whether it's sun, sea, or sand, oil, gas, bauxite, whatever. In fact, we're almost seeing a kind of denationalization process that's going on, because, we're almost getting back to that, of at least in Trinidad. So the economy still, this is a different society. Ours is a society of the larger number of people want to be able, not necessarily to work with the government, not to be working for a corporation. They want an economic structure that utilizes their products, their services. We need to have government. Government is the biggest buyer and seller of services. We want the government to be committed to small business, medium-sized business, quotas, those kinds of things that you could move from cottage to small to medium, build. Why are you importing so many things that you could buy here? What is happening with the consumption patterns? What investment is being made in transformation, and so on? But at the heart of all of this, it's my view, it is the education system. The education system, by the time people get to the point of playing a role, they have their knowledge base has already been set. The education system is telling us what is valid and what is not valid, what to leave at the door and what is legitimate. Whoever sets the exams are the persons who determine what is important and what is not. And so it's so much of what was necessary and is imperative for independence has not yet taken place. And so the problem is not leaders. I am aware the several cohorts of leaders have done really good job. But the problem with depending on the leaders is that when they change, the risk comes with the next cohort and they undermine everything that you've done. It has to be anchored in the people. And so if governments are not doing it, it is for organizations and institutions like ours, civic organizations, people organizations, churches stand in the breach. And we have to take that responsibility and grow that understanding and awareness. And to the point where people are confident enough not to just follow the leader, but to instruct the leader. And we have to be able to reach out across the sea. We have to reach to each other. We have to build networks where the Lloyd Best Institute of the Caribbean has partners elsewhere where we can, we do have that. As somebody mentioned, the other entity that we have, which is the Caribbean Yard Campus. You set up your own network and you find people who are, they are doing relevant education. It's not just indigenous, but indigenous happens to be relevant because it is people doing what the environment tells them they need to do. How do you prevent floods? What kind of plants grow here? Which one has medicine? Which one has medicinal properties? The language, the validation of the dialects, that's the kind of work that we're also involved in. Though the networks of support, I also want to, before I close, mention, I think I am sensing a dynamic in the region that it may be shifting a little bit south of the Caribbean, in the south of the Caribbean. It may be one of the things that are propelled. To everything, to every action, there is a reaction, and maybe the U.S., the Munroe doctrine has put our hackles up. We are seeing that clear and present danger, as they put it, and they may have the U.S. may have ironically activated the southern part of the Caribbean with their intervention in Venezuela. Things very often. People forget their own mandates and things happen that force. It's like a renewal of marriage vows, Something happens and you suddenly realize I have to get out of my complacency because staying complacent, that's the end. And it activates us. So I see this as a moment of challenge that brings out the best in us, that reminds us of the priority of integration. So I think I'll just pause there for now, if there are any questions.
Thank you very much, Sister Sunity, and for carrying on the work of your late husband. And as you said, what he would have said, this is a time for action irregardless. So it is that time. Brother Trevor, can you now wind us up, sir?
Can I say first of all that... It's not working? Yes. Yeah. Can I say first of all, Brother Byron, that winding up is very easy given the quality of the comments by colleague panelist Peter and my colleague independent senator from Trinidad and Tobago, a longtime friend. And in that context, let me first of all correct that I'm no longer the principal director of National Integrity Action because leaders have to know when to pass the baton. I'm the founding director, and the principal director is now Dr. Gavin Myers, and he is carrying forward the work quite effectively. But listening to colleague panelists, as well as the location where we are, regardless, I cannot but help remember the wisdom and advice of my supervisor of my master's thesis, which was the late Professor Rex Nettleford. It was a day after my first public demonstration among students at UWI from all the other territories. The day after that demonstration in 1964, when all of us students from the Caribbean stood with the workers at the television station, who were, in our view, dismissed without cause. And Rex, after reviewing the chapter of my thesis and giving me comments as to how to revise and reform it, said to me, "Trevor, I admire the passion and the enthusiasm of you and other Caribbean students manifested in the demonstration yesterday. But may I remind you of one thing. Changing Jamaica, changing the Caribbean is a marathon. And please recall that in all the athletic meets, regionally, Olympics, we have never medaled above 1,500 meters. So please, you have to learn this is a marathon. And you're not going to be going around in circles, but you will see marks along the way to show that there has been a road covered, but there's also more to be covered. And that is what has remained with me from that first demonstration 62 years ago, so that today I can be thankful to the Caribbean Leadership Christian Networks and the Norman Manley Foundation for initiating what I believe is likely to be a really important initiative, really important movement. Why do I say so? Because the people have to hold the leaders to account. They have to instruct, to use my friend from Trinidad's words, but they also have to constrain, instruct them and constrain them, and that requires the building of public awareness. And the building of public awareness to hold leaders to account and to do what Byron said, which is to make them understand that subjugating what appears to be national interest to serve a broader regional context, which includes us, to do that is going to require civil society organizations, non-governmental bodies, to play a much bigger role than we have done so far. We're beginning, but more needs to be done. It's going to require the Caribbean Leadership Christian Network, the Norman Manley Foundation, the National Integrity Action as a governance body, to find common cause with our regional counterparts. And not just the churches, not just the governance bodies, but the professional associations, the bar. Recently, as a signal of some of the beginnings of a new feeling, a new urgency, I had the honor to be invited to be the keynote address at the Caribbean Association of Judicial Officers. That's the judges across the region. I had the opportunity to go to Trinidad and to be the keynote speaker at the recent Trinidad and Tobago Transparency International Congress, to Guyana, the similar body, to do a presentation for the Parliamentary Reform Commission in Barbados. So each of us in our own way have to link and strengthen the connection with like-minded bodies across the region. And we have to do that to build the public awareness so that leaders don't feel free to do as they wish in respect of the critical urgency of Caribbean integration and Caribbean common action. I can think the Caribbean, there's a Commonwealth Caribbean Conference of Integrity Commissions and anti-corruption bodies that meets regularly, again a good sign, so that we need to do more of what has begun. regionalize the bodies and engage them more in building public awareness. Connected to that, I would say, is the need to use the current issues, the disappearance of the old world, imperfect as it was rule-governed, imperfect as it was, to a multilateral system that has not yet taken shape, but we are in the process of engaging it. We need to explain this to our people, what their stand should be on demands that are being made on each of us, and hopefully the powers that be expect that we be separate and divided in our responses. The most recent manifestation of this, of course, is the Third Country National Agreements, the TCN, which the United States has sought to negotiate separately with our respective territories. We need to say to our governments collectively that our people need to be informed of what is in those agreements. It cannot be kept in ignorance. And I'm encouraged by the fact that I saw a news item a few days ago that the leaders in the Eastern Caribbean states were meeting together to develop a common perspective in respect of further demands by the United States on this particular issue. So we need to be better integrated. Our people need to be better informed. We have a critical role to play, and we need to play that role more effectively. And this, I suggest, this symposium is an excellent renewal of the kind of common perspective that many of us as University of the West Indies students, UWI has to play a big role. Our media, Caribbean Association of Journalists, to play a big role in the issue of public awareness building, strengthening the people's capacity to constrain irresponsible leaders and to instruct them. That is one of the main lessons that we should learn from the fact that when the people were consulted in Jamaica, in September of 1961, they took a decision which set us back, but has not defeated us. And one of the reasons that they took that decision was that they were insufficiently informed. Public awareness building was not what it should be. And today, that deficit has to be corrected. And in so doing, strengthen our ability to survive, because closer integration is now a matter of survival, even more so than a matter of growth, development, and prosperity. We need to get together to survive. And in so doing, look for our allies beyond the traditional, the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China. What are the extent of our agreements? Our people need to understand why it's so important not to ditch or abandon old relationships, but to develop new ones that can serve our interests and the people's interests, their living standards, more effectively than is being done now. So I thank you again, Lisa, for the role of the Norman Manley Foundation in bringing us together, and Kenge from the Caribbean Christian Leadership Network. Let this be a beginning, a resuscitation of awareness building amongst our people so that they can play the role of instructing leaders and not only saying how high when the leaders say jump. Thank you very much.
To stand and be one power, charging our own destiny. We are uniting by one vision, pressing ahead in our own mission to bring to fulfillment our one true desire, the grand goal of our history. One love.